What if the moment everything falls apart, your car, your marriage, your confidence in a foreign country, is actually the exact moment you've been waiting for? Not the end. The beginning. Stay with me, because inside this video, I'm not teaching you perfect grammar. I'm telling you a real story about breaking down on a cold American highway, and how fixing a broken engine ended up fixing my heart. The breakdown that changed everything. Imagine you're on a dark highway in Oregon. It's freezing rain starting to stick to the windshield. You've been driving for 3 hours with 2 kids in the back seat, both asleep, and your husband hasn't said a word for the last 40 miles. Then the car makes a noise. Not a cough. A death rattle. Like something inside the engine just gave up on life. You pull over. The dashboard lights flicker and die. And you sit there, in complete silence, thinking, this is it. This is the moment I break. That was me. 3 years ago. Immigrant. 2 young kids. A marriage that felt like 2 people politely drowning next to each other. And now, a dead car on the side of a road I didn't grow up on, in a country where I still messed up the pronunciation of groceries half the time. Here's what I want you to feel right now, that exact heaviness. Because if you're watching this, you've probably had your own breakdown. Maybe not a car. Maybe your English feels like a broken transmission. Maybe you're stuck in a routine where you study for months but still freeze when someone asks, how's it going? Maybe your relationship is running on fumes, and you're too tired to even fight anymore. Your brain, by the way, hates this feeling. Neuroscience calls it learned helplessness, when failure repeats so often that your mind stops trying. It's not laziness. It's your amygdala screaming, nothing works, so conserve energy. Basically, your nervous system is throwing a tantrum on your behalf. Cute, right? But here's the line nobody tells you, breakdown is not the opposite of breakthrough. It's the waiting room. That night on the highway, I didn't know that yet. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, thinking about all the things I'd failed at. My English listening was so bad that I once nodded for a full minute while a nurse explained my son's allergy test, then walked out understanding. Nothing. My speaking? I'd rehearse simple sentences in the shower, then choke at the checkout counter when the cashier said, "Have a nice day." I'd whisper, "You too," to their back. And my marriage. God. We didn't yell. We just stopped talking about anything real. He'd come home from work, I'd put dinner on the table, the kids would watch cartoons. And we'd exist like 2 pieces of furniture that happened to share a bedroom. So when the car died, a tiny, ugly part of me thought, good. Now everything matches. But here's the punchline, and I want you to remember this when you feel like giving up on English, on love, on anything. A broken car forces you to stop pretending you're going somewhere. And sometimes, that stop is exactly where you need to be. Because while I sat there, waiting for a tow truck that wouldn't come for another hour, my 5-year-old woke up. She rubbed her eyes and said, very softly, "Mommy, why are we not moving?" And I realized, I didn't have an answer for her. Not about the car. Not about my life. That's where this story really begins. Not with a solution. With a question. The same question I'm asking you right now. What if breaking down is the only way to actually break through? Stick with me. Because over the next 11 parts, I'm going to tell you exactly how I went from that frozen highway to a kitchen table where my husband and I now laugh again. How I stopped studying English and started living it. And how a broken car fixed something I didn't even know was broken, my heart. But first, let me take you back, way back, to the very beginning of this American mess. Immigrant dreams on empty tank. Let me rewind 3 years before that frozen highway. Back to when the American dream still felt like a real thing, not a punchline you tell yourself while scrubbing a rental bathroom at midnight. I landed in the US with 2 suitcases, a green card that took 7 years to get, and a heart full of Pinterest-worthy expectations. You know the fantasy, friendly neighbors waving from white picket fences, kids playing in perfectly green yards, and you, the confident immigrant. Chatting easily with everyone because your English is pretty good, or so you convince yourself during the visa interview. Reality hit faster than a Midwest winter. My first week, I went to a supermarket to buy laundry detergent. Simple, right? I stood in the aisle for 15 minutes, staring at bottles with words like key, pod, ultra concentrate, and scent boosters. My brain, which had aced the TOEFL reading section, suddenly forgot every noun. I felt like a caveman examining a smartphone. A kind elderly woman asked, "Can I help you find something, dear?" And I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. Just a weird smile. A nod. Then I grabbed a random blue bottle and ran to the checkout. That bottle turned out to be fabric softener. I washed my clothes with it for a month. They were soft. And weirdly slimy. Here's what they don't tell you about immigration. It's not the big things that break you. It's the small humiliations. The cashier who sighs because you're taking too long to find your card. The barista who repeats, "For here or to go?" 3 times, each time slower and louder, as if volume equals understanding. The moment your child comes home from school and says, "Mom, my friend's mom said your accent is cute, but she said it like a bad thing." My husband found a job within 3 weeks. He's an engineer, the kind of guy who solves problems with logic. His English was worse than mine, but his job didn't require small talk. Numbers are the same in every language. I, on the other hand, had a degree in literature, useless in a country where I could barely read a cereal box without a dictionary. So I stayed home with our 2 kids. And slowly, quietly, I started to disappear. Here's a weird fact about your brain. When you stop using a language actively, your neural pathways for that language don't just weaken, they get pruned. Like a garden you stopped watering. Psychologists call this language attrition. But what it feels like is shame. Pure, hot shame. Because you know the word. It's right there. On the tip of your tongue. But it won't come out. And the more you panic, the more your amygdala, that lovely alarm system we met earlier, decides this is a life or death situation and shuts down your prefrontal cortex, the part that actually speaks. So you stand there. Mouth open. Eyes blinking. While the world waits. That was my daily life. And because I couldn't communicate well, I started to believe I wasn't smart. I wasn't interesting. I wasn't worth talking to. And that belief, more than any grammar mistake, poisoned everything. My husband would come home tired. I'd be tired from a different kind of labor, the labor of pretending I understood everything when I didn't. The labor of smiling through confusion. The labor of translating every doctor's note, school permission slip, and utility bill with Google Translate's terrible camera feature. Side note, Google Translate once turned, "Your child has a mild fever," into, "Your child is mildly on fire." I showed up at the ER. The nurse was not amused. We stopped having real conversations. Not because we didn't love each other, but because every conversation required so much effort. He'd say, "How was your day?" And I'd say, "Fine." Because explaining that I cried in the parking lot of Target because I couldn't return a pair of shoes, the word receipt just wouldn't come out, felt too embarrassing. Too small. Too pathetic. Money was tight. We lived in a small apartment near a highway. The walls were thin. The neighbors fought every night in Spanish, and I'd lie in bed, jealous that at least they had a language to fight in. Here's the punchline: an empty tank doesn't mean you have nothing. It means you've been running on fumes for so long, you forgot what full feels like. And that's exactly where my marriage was. Fumes. Not hate. Not even anger. Just exhaustion. The kind that makes you scroll your phone instead of talking. The kind that makes you say, "I'm fine," until you believe it. But here's what I learned, and this is for anyone who feels like their English, their relationship, or their life is running on empty. Running on fumes is actually a gift. Because when the tank hits E, you can't pretend anymore. You have to stop. You have to ask for help. You have to admit that the dream you packed in those 2 suitcases didn't survive customs. My husband and I didn't have a big fight. We had a small one. About dishes. Dirty dishes in the sink. And somehow, that tiny argument became a dam breaking. I started crying. Not pretty crying. Ugly, snotty, heaving crying. And I said, in broken English, because that's all I had, "I don't know who I am here." He looked at me. And for the first time in months, he didn't offer a solution. He didn't say, "It'll get better," or "Just study harder." He just sat down on the kitchen floor next to me. And he said, in his own broken English, "Me neither." That was the first honest conversation we'd had in a year. So here's the question I want to leave you with before the next section. What would happen if you stopped pretending your English, or your life, was fine? What if you let someone see the messy, struggling, fabric softener washing version of you? Because that frozen highway? That broken car? It was still 2 years away. But the crack in my heart started right there, on that kitchen floor. With dirty dishes in the sink and 2 people who had no idea how to fix anything. Spoiler, you don't fix a heart with a toolbox. You fix it with one honest sentence at a time. And that's exactly where our story goes next, into the silent war nobody talks about. The one that happens when 2 people love each other but have no idea how to say it anymore. The silent war at home. Have you ever had an argument that wasn't actually an argument? No yelling. No door slamming. Just 2 people in the same room, breathing the same air, feeling completely alone together. That's what I call the silent war. And let me tell you, it's way more dangerous than any screaming match. After that night on the kitchen floor, nothing magically got better. We didn't hug it out and suddenly start speaking fluent English to each other. Nope. We just went back to our routines. He went to work. I took care of the kids. We ate dinner in front of the TV. And the silence grew back, thicker than before. Here's the thing about silence in a marriage, it's not empty. It's full. Full of things you want to say but don't. Full of resentments you've tucked away like dirty laundry. Full of small wounds that never got a band-aid, so they just fester. Psychologists call this stonewalling. It's one of the 4 horsemen of divorce, according to relationship researcher John Gottman. Stonewalling happens when one person, or both, shuts down completely. Not because they don't care. Because they care too much and don't know what to do with the pain. So the face goes blank. The shoulders turn away. The eyes find something interesting on the ceiling. And the message is clear, I'm not here anymore. That was us. Only worse. Because on top of the stonewalling, we had a language barrier. Not just English versus our native language, but emotional language. The vocabulary of feelings. You know how hard it is to say, I feel neglected, in your own tongue. Try saying it in a second language when you're exhausted and ashamed. I remember one Tuesday. Nothing special. He came home at 7 p.m. I had made spaghetti, the only thing I could cook without messing up. The kids were already bathed, pajamaed, and half asleep. I sat down across from him. And I wanted to say, I miss you. I miss the version of us who laughed. I miss feeling like a person instead of a maid who happens to live here. What came out? Food is ready. He said, okay. And that was it. That was our entire conversation for the night. Here's a brain fact that will blow your mind. Your brain processes emotional rejection the same way it processes physical pain. The same neural regions, the anterior cingulate cortex. The insula, light up on an fMRI whether you're being burned by a hot stove or being ignored by someone you love. So when I say that silence hurt, I mean it literally. My brain was registering every quiet meal, every turned away shoulder, every okay, as a small electrical burn. No wonder I felt like crying all the time. But here's the sneaky part about the silent war, it's invisible. No bruises. No broken dishes. So you start to gaslight yourself. Am I overreacting? Maybe this is just how marriage is after kids. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe my English is so bad that I'm imagining the distance. You convince yourself that everything is fine, even as your body tells you otherwise. Tension headaches. Tight shoulders. That weird knot in your stomach that never goes away. The kids felt it too. Kids are emotional barometers. They don't understand words like stonewalling, but they understand vibes. My daughter started waking up at night. My son, who was usually cheerful, became clingy and whiny. And I'd hold them and think, I'm failing them. I'm failing everyone. Meanwhile, my English practice had completely stopped. Not because I was lazy. Because I was depressed. And depression doesn't look like crying in bed all day. Sometimes it looks like a perfectly functional mom who makes spaghetti and wipes countertops but hasn't opened a language app in 3 months. Sometimes it looks like watching YouTube videos in your native language for hours because listening to English feels like homework. Sometimes it looks like giving up quietly, without telling anyone, not even yourself. Here's the punchline, the silent war isn't fought with weapons. It's fought with absences. The absence of a question. The absence of a touch. The absence of the words, I'm sorry, or, I'm scared, or, I still love you, I just forgot how to show it. And that's exactly where I was on the night the car broke down. Not at rock bottom. Rock bottom would have been easier, at least there's dirt to stand on. I was in the gray zone. The numb zone. The zone where you don't even have the energy to hope for things to get better. But here's what I didn't know yet. The silent war ends the moment one person makes a sound. Not a loud sound. Just a real one. An honest one. A sound that breaks the pattern. That sound was coming. And it didn't come from me. It came from a stranger with a tow truck and a very unexpected lesson about broken things. But before we get there, let me ask you something. Be honest. Are you in a silent war right now? Not just with a partner, with your English learning? With yourself? Are you going through the motions, pretending everything is fine, while inside you feel like a car that's been sitting in the garage for years. Engine cold, tires flat. If that's you, stay with me. Because in the next section, someone is about to say something that will crack open my entire world. And it might crack yours too. When love speaks different languages. Let me tell you about the most dangerous sentence in any relationship. It's not, I don't love you anymore. It's not even, I want a divorce. No, the most dangerous sentence is much shorter, much quieter, and much more common. Here it is, you wouldn't understand. Say it to yourself. Feel how it closes a door. How it draws a line between you and the other person. How it says, we speak different languages, not just English and something else, but heart languages. My husband and I spoke the same native tongue. We grew up in the same country, same food, same jokes. But after 2 years in America, we were speaking completely different emotional languages. And neither of us knew how to translate anymore. Here's what I mean. When I felt lonely, I wanted him to ask. How are you really doing? What happened today? Tell me the hard part. That's my love language, words of affirmation, specifically curious questions. But his love language was acts of service. So when he came home and fixed the leaky faucet or took out the trash without being asked, he thought he was saying, I love you. And when I didn't light up with gratitude, he felt rejected. Meanwhile, I was starving for conversation. Not about bills or kid schedules. Real conversation. The kind where you say, I felt invisible at the grocery store today, and the other person doesn't try to solve it, just says, that sucks. Tell me more. But I couldn't say that. Because in English, those words felt clunky and fake. And in our native language, they felt too vulnerable. So I said nothing. And he said nothing. And we both felt unseen. Here's a brutal truth about learning English as an immigrant. You don't just learn new words. You learn a new emotional range. Every language has its own personality. English, for example, is great at, I'm fine, when you're dying inside. It's great at small talk that means nothing. But try to express deep longing, quiet resentment, or the specific ache of missing your mother's cooking. English suddenly feels like a cheap tool for a delicate job. Psychologists call this phenomenon emotional acculturation. It takes years, sometimes decades, for your feelings to catch up with your new language. In the meantime, you sound like a robot. Or worse, a child. Because complex emotions come out as simple sentences. I sad. You no care. Why you not talk? And the other person, hearing those simple words, thinks you're being dramatic or immature. They don't realize that inside your head, there's a whole novel of nuance that just won't translate. That was my marriage. Me, sounding like a toddler having a tantrum. Him, sounding like a boring manual. And both of us wondering where the people we married had gone. Let me give you an example. One night, I tried to tell him that I felt jealous of a neighbor. This neighbor was American, had a perfect lawn, and always chatted with me in easy, slow English. She was nice. But every time I saw her, I felt a hot, ugly feeling in my chest. Jealousy? No. It was more specific. It was the feeling of watching someone live the life you were supposed to have. In my native language, I have a word for that feeling. Actually, I have 3. In English, I had jealous and sad and tired. None of them fit. So I said, I don't like that lady. My husband looked confused. Why? She's nice. I couldn't explain. So I said, just don't like. He shrugged. And that was it. Another missed connection. Another small death. Here's the science part, because I know you love this. Your brain's left hemisphere handles language. But emotions live in the right hemisphere, deep in the limbic system. When you learn a new language as an adult, you're building new pathways between these two sides. But those pathways are slow. They're weak. They're like a dirt road while your native language is a 12-lane highway. So when you feel something big, your brain naturally defaults to the highway, your first language. But if you're trying to speak English, you have to force those feelings onto the dirt road. And they get bumpy. They get stuck. They come out wrong. That's not a character flaw. That's neuroscience. You're not bad at feelings. You're just building a road. But here's the punchline, and this is the part that changed everything for me. Your partner can't read your mind. But they also can't read your heart if you don't give them a map. I spent months resenting my husband for not understanding me. But I never gave him the translation guide. I never said, when I say, I don't like her, what I actually mean is, I feel inadequate and scared and homesick. I expected him to just know. Because in my head, it was obvious. But it wasn't obvious. It was hidden behind a broken language barrier and a wall of pride. The silent war isn't just about silence. It's about mistranslation. It's about saying, I'm fine, when you mean, please hold me. It's about hearing, okay, when they mean, I'm trying but I don't know how. So here's my question for you, right now. And I want you to really sit with it. Where in your life are you speaking the wrong language? Not English versus Spanish. But the language of your heart versus the words actually coming out of your mouth. Are you saying, I'm fine, to your partner when you're drowning? Are you telling yourself, I'll practice English tomorrow, when what you really mean is, I'm scared of sounding stupid? Because here's the beautiful, terrible truth. Breakdowns in communication aren't failures. They're just data. They're your relationship, with yourself, with your spouse, with English, telling you exactly where the road is missing. And in our story, the missing road was about to lead us to the most unexpected teacher. A tow truck driver with a greasy uniform and a philosophy that would crack my heart wide open. But first, let me take you back to that frozen highway. Because the car wasn't the only thing that had broken down. And the fix wasn't going to come from a mechanic. The tow truck driver's unexpected lesson. Let me paint you a picture. It's 11 p.m. Freezing rain. Two kids asleep in the back seat of a dead car on the shoulder of a highway in Oregon. No streetlights. No other cars for miles. Just the sound of rain hitting metal and the occasional gust of wind rocking the vehicle like a cradle that forgot how to be comforting. I've already called roadside assistance. They said 45 minutes. That was an hour ago. My phone battery is at 12%. My husband's phone goes straight to voicemail, probably dead too, or maybe he just doesn't want to talk. I wouldn't blame him. We haven't had a real conversation in weeks. And then I see headlights. Not the blue and red of a police car. Just regular headlights, approaching slowly from behind. A truck. An old Ford F-150, the kind that's been driven into the ground and kept alive by sheer stubbornness. It pulls over in front of me. A man gets out. Here's what I notice first, his boots. Muddy. Worn. The kind of boots that have walked through 1,000 problems. Second, his jacket, a faded Carhartt with a patch that says, Ed's Towing, since 1987. Third, his face. Older, maybe 60. Wrinkles that look like they came from squinting at broken engines and broken people. He's holding a flashlight and a coffee mug, not a clipboard. He knocks on my window. I roll it down halfway, because stranger danger, right? He doesn't smile. He just looks at me, then at the kids, then back at me. And he says something I will never forget. You're not stuck because of the engine, sweetheart. You're stuck because you stopped asking for help. I blinked. Did a tow truck driver just psychoanalyze me? I opened my mouth to say something defensive. I did ask for help. I called roadside assistance. I'm a responsible adult. But nothing came out. Because he wasn't wrong. Here's the thing about Ed, that was his name, I learned later. Ed had been towing cars on that highway for 38 years. He'd seen every kind of breakdown. Dead batteries. Blown transmissions. Flat tires in the rain. But he'd also seen something else. He'd seen people sitting in their broken cars, alone, crying, too proud or too scared to call anyone. He'd seen marriages end in parking lots. He'd seen immigrants like me, stranded and silent, convinced that asking for help was the same as admitting failure. And he had a theory. He told me while he hooked up my car to his truck, rain dripping off the brim of his cap. He said, you know what the most common problem is? Not the alternator. Not the fuel pump. It's people thinking they have to fix everything themselves. They drive until something breaks. Then they sit there, embarrassed, like a broken car means they're broken people. I wanted to argue. But my car was literally being towed. So I listened. Here's the science behind what Ed was saying, and yes, I looked this up later because it blew my mind. Humans are terrible at asking for help. It's not just pride. It's biology. When you need help, your brain activates the same threat response as physical danger. Your amygdala, there she is again, interprets I need assistance as I am weak, and weakness, in evolutionary terms, meant getting kicked out of the tribe. So your body pumps cortisol. Your heart rate spikes. Your face flushes. And you say, I'm fine, even when you're not. Psychologists call this help-seeking avoidance. It's why people die of heart attacks at home instead of calling an ambulance. It's why students fail classes rather than asking for tutoring. It's why couples divorce after years of silent suffering instead of going to counseling. And it's why immigrants like me spend months pretending to understand conversations, nodding along with a fake smile. Rather than saying the terrifying words, can you say that again slowly? I'm still learning English. Ed didn't know any of this science. He just knew people. He hooked up my car, then walked me and the kids to his truck. The kids were awake now, confused and cranky. He handed them each a granola bar from his glove compartment. Then he looked at me and said something that hit me harder than the frozen rain. My wife was an immigrant. From Mexico. When we first met, she barely spoke English. She'd get so frustrated she'd cry in the grocery store. You know what she did? She started carrying a little notebook. Every time she didn't know a word, she'd write it down. Then she'd come home and ask me, how do you say this? Not once. 100 times. 1,000 times. And you know what? I loved her more every time she asked. Not less. I started crying. Not pretty crying. The kind where your nose runs and your chin quivers and you can't form words. Because in that moment, I realized something terrible and wonderful. I had never actually asked my husband for help with my English. Not once. I had complained. I had sulked. I had cried alone in the bathroom. But I had never looked him in the eye and said, "I'm struggling. Teach me. Practice with me. Be patient with me." Why? Because asking felt like failing. Because I wanted to be the strong one, the capable one, the immigrant who figured it all out without being a burden. But Ed was right. That's not strength. That's just a different kind of broken. Here's the punchline, and I want you to tattoo this on your brain: a broken car doesn't need a lecture. It needs a tow truck. A broken heart doesn't need a hero. It needs someone to hand it a granola bar and say, "You're not alone." Ed drove us to a small repair shop. He didn't charge me for the tow. He said, "Pay it forward. And next time your car makes a funny noise, don't wait until it dies. Ask for help before you're stranded." Then he tipped his cap, got back in his truck, and drove away into the rain. I stood there in the parking lot, holding my sleeping daughter, my son clutching my leg. The repair shop was closed. But there was a small motel next door. I had $23 in my wallet. Just enough for one night. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching my kids breathe, and I thought about Ed's wife and her little notebook. I thought about all the times I had pretended to understand. All the times I had nodded and smiled while drowning inside. All the times I had blamed my husband, blamed America, blamed my bad luck, when the real problem was simpler and harder. I had never asked for help. So I made a decision. Tomorrow, I would call my husband. Not to fight. Not to complain. I would say the words I had been too proud to say for 2 years. I need you. Not to fix me. To sit with me while I fix myself. But first, I had to fix something else. Something smaller. Something I could control. The car would take 3 days to repair. I had no money, no friends nearby, and no idea what to do next. But I had a notebook in my bag. A pen. And a decision to stop pretending. That's where the real breakthrough began. Not with a tow truck. With a question I finally had the courage to ask. Walking home in the rain. The motel room cost $62. I had 23. The woman at the front desk had a kind face but a firm policy. No money, no room. I stood there, holding my daughter, my son hiding behind my legs, and felt the full weight of every bad decision I had ever made. Then she looked at my kids. She sighed. She said, "One night. Don't tell my manager." She charged me the 23 and handed me a key to room 117. The room smelled like cigarettes and regret. The carpet was stained. The heater made a noise like a dying animal. But it had a bed. A bathroom. 4 walls. It was a castle. I put the kids to bed. They fell asleep immediately, exhausted from the cold and the confusion. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and stared at my phone. 12% battery. 1 missed call from my husband. No voicemail. No text. I wanted to call him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say, "Where were you? Why didn't you answer? Why am I alone in a motel with no money and a broken car and 2 kids and a heart that feels like a crushed soda can?" But I didn't. Because what would that fix? Nothing. It would just add more noise to the silence. So I did something else. I opened the notebook I always carried, the one I never wrote in, and I wrote 1 sentence. In English. Slowly. Painfully. Today my car broke and I cried and a man named Ed helped me. That was it. 7 words. But they were my words. Not translated. Not perfect. Just mine. And writing them felt like opening a window in a room that had been sealed shut for years. Here's a weird thing about your brain. Writing by hand activates the reticular activating system, the part that decides what's important. When you type, your brain treats it like background noise. But when you physically form letters on paper, you're telling your nervous system, pay attention. This matters. That's why journaling works. That's why taking notes by hand helps you remember. And that's why, in that ugly motel bathroom, writing 7 ugly words felt like a small revolution. I wrote another sentence. I don't know how to fix my marriage. Then another. I am scared I am a bad mom. Then another. I miss speaking my real language. The words came out crooked. The grammar was a disaster. I wrote scared as scared, correct, then marriage as marriage, wrong, then crossed it out and tried again. It didn't matter. Nobody was grading this. Nobody was judging. It was just me and the page and the truth I had been hiding from. I filled 3 pages that night. By the end, my hand hurt. My eyes were swollen from crying. But something had shifted. A tiny crack in the wall I had built around myself. The next morning, I had to make a decision. The car would take 3 days to fix. The repair shop owner, a gruff man named Hank, said the alternator was dead and something about the timing belt. He quoted me $480. I had $42 left. No credit card. No family nearby. My husband's paycheck came in 5 days. I could call him. Ask him to wire money. Ask him to come get us. Ask for help. Or I could figure it out myself. Because that's what I did, right? I figured things out. I had gotten us this far. I didn't need anyone. That voice in my head, the one that said, "You don't need anyone," sounded strong. But it wasn't strength. It was fear wearing a muscle shirt. Real strength isn't doing everything alone. Real strength is knowing when to stop pretending you're okay. I didn't know that yet. So I made the hard choice. I decided to walk. The motel was 7 miles from a small town with a library. The library had free Wi-Fi. Free computers. Free warmth. I packed a bag with snacks, water, and the kids' jackets. My daughter was 4. My son was 2. A 7-mile walk in November rain, with 2 toddlers, no stroller, and a broken heart. Sounds crazy, right? It was. But sometimes crazy is the only option that feels honest. We started walking at 8 a.m. The rain was light at first, more of a mist. My daughter held my hand. My son rode on my shoulders. The road had no sidewalk, just gravel and mud and the occasional pickup truck splashing past. Every car that passed, I flinched. Part of me hoped one of them would stop. Part of me was terrified they would. By mile 2, the rain got heavier. My son started crying. My daughter's shoes were soaked. I stopped under a tree, bare branches, not much shelter, and tried to think. What would a smart person do? Call for help. But I had already decided not to call. Why? Because I was punishing myself. Because I thought suffering would earn me something. Because somewhere deep inside, I believed that if I hurt enough, I would deserve to be loved. That's a dark thought to have on a rainy highway with 2 children. But it was true. And naming it, just admitting it to myself, was the first time I saw the lie I had been living. Here's the psychology: self-punishment is often disguised as self-reliance. You tell yourself you're being strong. You're being independent. You're not bothering anyone. But underneath, you're saying, I don't deserve comfort. I don't deserve help. I have to earn my place by suffering. It's a trap. And it's incredibly common among immigrants, perfectionists, and anyone who grew up being told that asking for help was weak. I was all 3. By mile 4, my son had fallen asleep on my shoulders. My daughter was crying silently, the kind of crying that's too tired to make noise. I was crying too. The rain hid my tears. Or maybe the tears hid the rain. I don't know. I just kept walking. And then, at mile 5, a car pulled over. Not a pickup truck. A small blue Honda. The window rolled down. A woman's face appeared. Middle-aged. Gray hair. Worried eyes. She said, "Honey, get in. You're going to kill those babies." I wanted to say no. I wanted to say I'm fine. I wanted to keep punishing myself. But my legs wouldn't move anymore. My arms were shaking from holding my son. My daughter was looking at me with an expression that said, "Mommy, please." So I got in. Her name was Margaret. She was a retired schoolteacher. She drove us to the library, bought us hot chocolate from a vending machine, and sat with me while the kids played with puzzles in the children's section. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer advice. She just sat there, quietly present, like a warm blanket on a cold day. Before she left, she wrote her phone number on a napkin. She said, "Everyone needs help sometimes. That's not weakness. That's being human." I held that napkin like it was made of gold. That night, back at the motel, I finally called my husband. Not to fight. Not to blame. I said 3 sentences. 3 sentences that changed everything. The car broke. We're okay. But I can't do this alone anymore. There was a long silence. Then he said, "Tell me where you are." "I'm coming." And for the first time in 2 years, I believed him. The kids' tiny hands. My husband arrived the next morning. He drove 4 hours through the night in a car that had its own check engine light blinking. When he walked into that sad motel room, he looked terrible. Dark circles. Unshaven. The same exhausted expression I had been wearing for months. He didn't say, "I'm sorry," or "What were you thinking?" He just looked at the kids, eating stale cereal on the stained carpet, then looked at me. And he sat down on the floor next to them. He didn't try to hug me. He didn't try to fix anything. He just sat there, present, quiet, like a man who had finally stopped running. That's when my daughter climbed into his lap. She was 4. She had chubby fingers and a stubborn chin and a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the most important person in the world. She grabbed his hand, his big, calloused, engineer hand, and put it on her heart. She said, "Daddy, my heart is beating fast. Are you scared too?" And he started crying. I had seen my husband cry twice in 10 years. Once at our wedding. Once when his grandmother died. This was the 3rd time. He held her and said, "Yeah, baby. Daddy's scared too." That moment cracked something open in me. Not the way a hammer cracks a wall. The way a seed cracks open underground, slow, invisible, but absolutely necessary for growth. Because in that second, I realized something I had been too busy drowning to see. My kids weren't just watching me struggle. They were learning how to struggle. Here's the science that keeps me up at night. Children's brains have something called mirror neurons. These little neural mirrors fire not only when they do something, but when they watch someone else do it. When you cry, their brain practices crying. When you shut down, their brain practices shutting down. When you say, "I'm fine," through clenched teeth, their brain learns that feelings are dangerous and should be hidden. You are not just living your life. You are writing the operating system for another human being. I had been writing a terrible operating system. Every silent meal. Every fake smile. Every time I pretended to understand English when I didn't, my kids saw that. Every time I avoided a conversation with my husband because it was too hard, they absorbed that. Every night I cried in the bathroom and then came out with a bright, "Who wants a story?" They knew. Kids always know. The psychologist John Bowlby called this internal working models. By age 5, a child has already built a mental template for how relationships work based on what they've seen at home. If they see parents who talk through problems, they learn that conflict is manageable. If they see parents who stonewall, they learn that love means silence. If they see a mother who never asks for help, they learn that asking for help is shameful. I looked at my daughter holding my husband's hand, and I thought, this is the model I'm giving her. A mother who walks 7 miles in the rain rather than make a phone call. A father who drives 4 hours because he didn't know how to answer the first time. A marriage held together by obligation instead of joy. That thought was more painful than anything Ed the tow truck driver had said. More painful than the frozen highway. More painful than the empty bank account. Because I could ruin my own life if I wanted to. That was my choice. But I didn't have the right to ruin theirs. Here's the punchline, and I want you to feel this in your bones. You are never more motivated than when you realize someone small is watching you and building their future out of your rubble. I stopped crying. I stood up. I walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back was a mess. But she wasn't dead. She wasn't broken beyond repair. She was just tired of pretending. I walked back into the main room. My husband was still on the floor, my son now asleep on his chest. My daughter was drawing on a napkin with a crayon she had found under the bed. I sat down across from them. And I said the hardest thing I had ever said in my life. Not in English. In our native language. Because some things need to come from the oldest part of your brain, the part that learned love before it learned any words. I said, I don't know how to fix us. But I want to try. Really try. Not for the kids. For us. Because I still love you. I just forgot how to show it. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, me too. That was it. No grand speech. No dramatic music. Just 2 tired people on a motel floor, admitting that they had both forgotten how to love each other. And somehow, that admission was more intimate than anything we had shared in years. Here's the thing about hitting bottom, the bottom is solid. You can stand on it. You can push off from it. You can stop falling and start climbing. But you can't climb if you're still pretending you're not at the bottom. My kids gave me the courage to admit where I was. Not because they said anything profound. Because they were there. Because their tiny hands reached for their daddy's hand, and their tiny hearts beat fast, and they looked to us for safety. And for the first time, I realized that safety doesn't come from a perfect car or a perfect house or perfect English. Safety comes from showing up. From saying, I'm scared too. From letting someone hold you while you cry. That day, we made a pact. Not a formal one. Just an understanding. We would stop pretending. We would stop hiding. We would stop using silence as a weapon and pride as a shield. We would learn to ask for help, from each other, from strangers, from the universe if necessary. And we would do it together. The car wasn't fixed yet. The money was still gone. The English was still messy. But something had shifted. The seed had cracked open. And the next morning, I did something I had never done before. I took out that notebook, the one I had written 7 ugly words in, and I wrote a sentence in English that I actually meant. Not a practiced sentence. Not a perfect sentence. Just a true one. Today I am scared but I am not alone. Then I showed it to my husband. He read it. He nodded. And he wrote his own sentence underneath. Me neither. That notebook became the first chapter of our new language. Not textbook English. Real English. Messy English. The English of 2 people learning to say, I need you, without dying of shame. And that, my friend, is where the real learning began. Not with a lesson plan. With a confession. Fixing more than an engine. Here's something nobody tells you about fixing things. The repair never starts where the damage is. Your car makes a weird noise. The problem is usually somewhere else. Your marriage is falling apart. The crack isn't in the big fights, it's in the small silences. Your English feels broken. The issue isn't grammar. It's shame. Hank, the repair shop owner, taught me this. When he finally looked under the hood of my dead car, he didn't just point at the alternator and say, that's your problem. He ran his hand along the belts. He checked the battery terminals. He listened to the engine crank, or try to crank, and he frowned. Then he said something that changed how I think about everything. Lady, your alternator's dead. But it didn't just die on its own. Look at this corrosion on the battery. Look at these loose connections. You've been ignoring the small stuff for so long that the big stuff finally gave up. He wasn't talking about the car anymore. And we both knew it. That's the thing about mechanics, the good ones, anyway. They understand systems. They know that every part is connected to every other part. A tiny crack in a hose leads to a leak. A leak leads to low pressure. Low pressure leads to overheating. Overheating leads to a blown engine. And by the time you're stranded on a frozen highway, the original problem, that tiny crack, is long forgotten. All you see is the disaster. Your brain works the same way. So does your marriage. So does your English. Let me give you the science. Your brain has a built-in negativity bias. It evolved to notice threats first. A tiger in the bushes? That's urgent. A slowly corroding battery? That's boring. So your brain ignores the small stuff, the daily micro-stresses, the tiny grammar mistakes. The little moments of disconnection with your partner, until they compound into a catastrophe. Then your brain panics and says, see? Everything is terrible. But it's not. You just ignored the small fixes for too long. That's what Hank taught me. Fixing the car wasn't just about replacing the alternator. It was about cleaning the corrosion. tightening the connections, checking the belts, doing the boring, unglamorous maintenance that prevents breakdowns in the first place. And fixing my marriage? Same thing. No grand gestures. No dramatic apologies. Just small, boring, daily repairs. So here's what we did. My husband and I sat down, not at a therapist's office, not on a romantic date, just on that ugly motel bed, and we made a list. Not a to-do list. A repair list. Small things we had stopped doing. He wrote, say good morning before checking phone. Ask about her day and actually listen. Fix the leaky faucet without being asked. I wrote, say, I need help, instead of pretending. Write one sentence in English every day. Stop walking away when I'm angry. The list was embarrassing. It looked like the homework of two children who had forgotten how to be human. But that was the point. We had forgotten. And forgetting isn't permanent. You can remember again. You just have to practice. Here's the psychological principle. The smallest consistent actions create the largest long-term changes. It's called marginal gains. British cycling used this to dominate the Olympics. They improved hundreds of tiny things, from the ergonomics of the seats to the fabric of the suits. Each improvement was barely noticeable. Together, they transformed a mediocre team into champions. Your marriage is the same. Your English is the same. You don't need a breakthrough. You need 100 tiny repairs. So we started. The next morning, my husband said, good morning, before he picked up his phone. I didn't say thank you. I just nodded. But I noticed. That night, I wrote a sentence in my notebook. Today my husband said good morning first. The grammar was fine. The content was boring. But I wrote it. Day 2, he asked about my day. I actually answered, not fine, but real things. I was lonely at the library. I missed my mom. He didn't try to solve anything. He just said, that sounds hard. And that was enough. Day 3, I asked him for help. Real help. Not, can you hold the baby? I said, can you practice English with me? Just 5 minutes. I want to say this sentence and I want you to tell me if it sounds weird. He looked surprised. Then he said, okay. We sat on the floor. I said, I feel sad when you come home late. He said, that's not wrong, but you could say, I feel sad when you come home late without calling. More specific. I wrote it down. 5 minutes. That's all. Here's the thing about those 5 minutes. They were more effective than any language app one ever used. Because language isn't just vocabulary. It's connection. And when you practice with someone you love, your brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Oxytocin reduces stress and increases neural plasticity. In other words, feeling safe makes you learn faster. That's not motivational poster fluff. That's neuroscience. By day 7, something had shifted. The car was still in the shop. We were still broke. My English was still far from perfect. But the silence in our motel room had changed. It wasn't a hostile silence anymore. It was a comfortable one. The kind where two people can sit quietly without feeling like they're drowning. I remember the exact moment I realized we were actually fixing things. My daughter was drawing. My son was stacking blocks. My husband was reading something on his phone. And I was writing in my notebook. Nobody was performing. Nobody was pretending. We were just being. Together. In the same room. Without a TV or a distraction or a fight waiting to happen. That was the alternator. That was the small repair that made the big system work again. But we still had one major problem. The car needed $480. We had 42. My husband's paycheck was 5 days away. And the motel room was only paid up for 2 more nights. We were about to be stranded again, not on a highway, but in a town where we knew no one. That's when Hank did something unexpected. He said, "I'll fix the car. You pay me when you can. But you have to do something for me first." I braced myself. Free labor always comes with a price. He said, "Teach your kids one new English word every day. And write it down. Show me the list when you pick up the car." I laughed. Actually laughed. For the first time in months. Not because it was funny. Because it was so absurdly kind. A mechanic who wanted a vocabulary list instead of cash. I said, "Why?" He shrugged. Because my wife was an ESL teacher. She always said people learn best when they're teaching someone else. You teach your kids, you'll learn twice as fast. And your kids will remember that their mom never gave up. So we made a deal. Every night, we learned one word. Apple. Blanket. Rain. Help. Together. My kids would say the word. I would write it. My husband would use it in a sentence. It took 3 minutes. It was silly. It was small. And it was the most powerful English lesson of my life. Because here's the final punchline of this section. You don't fix a broken heart with a grand gesture. You fix it with an alternator, a notebook, and a single word learned together in a motel room that smells like cigarettes. The car would be ready in 3 days. But something else was already running again. Something that didn't need a timing belt or a battery. My heart. Idling. Rough, but running. Learning English through tears. Let me tell you about the worst English lesson I ever had. It was in a motel room. I was crying. My notebook was soggy from tears and coffee. And I was trying to write a sentence so simple that a 5-year-old could say it, but so true that it felt like pulling teeth. The sentence was, "I am scared that I will never be good enough." I knew every word. I had studied them all. Scared, fear. Never, not ever. Good enough, sufficient, acceptable, worthy. I could define each one. I could spell each one. But putting them together in that order, on that page, admitting that sentence to myself in a language that still felt like a borrowed coat? That was the hardest thing I had ever done with English. Harder than the TOEFL. Harder than the visa interview. Harder than any conversation with a cashier. And here's the secret that nobody tells you about language learning. You haven't really learned a word until you've cried into it. I know that sounds dramatic. But stick with me. Because what happened in that motel room, what happened when I stopped studying English and started feeling English, is the reason I'm making this video. Today. It's the reason I can sit here, 3 years later, and tell you this story without a script, without fear. Without that old familiar knot in my stomach. Let me back up. After Hank the mechanic gave us his deal, 1 new word per day, teach the kids, I realized something uncomfortable. I had been learning English all wrong. Not wrong like bad grammar. Wrong like a person trying to learn to swim by reading a book about buoyancy. I knew the rules. I knew the vocabulary. But I was terrified of the water. Here's the science. Your brain has two memory systems, declarative and procedural. Declarative memory is facts, vocabulary lists, grammar rules, verb conjugations. That's the stuff you study with flashcards. Procedural memory is skills, riding a bike, typing, speaking without thinking. That's the stuff you learn by doing, failing, and doing again. Most adult language learners focus almost entirely on declarative memory. Then they wonder why they freeze in real conversations. Because real conversation isn't a fact. It's a performance. And you can't learn performance from a book. I had spent 2 years filling my declarative memory with English words. But my procedural memory, the part that actually speaks, was a dusty, unused room. Every time I opened my mouth, my brain had to translate from my native language, check the grammar, panic, and then produce something that sounded like a robot having a stroke. That's not speaking. That's data retrieval under pressure. So I made a decision. I stopped studying English. I started living it. And the way I did that was embarrassingly simple. Every night, I told my own story in English. Out loud. To myself. In the dark. Not a perfect story. Not a practice story. Just whatever had happened that day, in the simplest words I could find. Today I woke up. I made coffee. I spilled the coffee. I cried about the coffee. Then I laughed about crying about coffee. The end. It sounded stupid. It felt stupid. But I did it anyway. Because the alternative, continuing to pretend, continuing to freeze. Continuing to let my kids watch their mother disappear into silence, was worse than feeling stupid. Here's what happened after 1 week. My husband heard me talking to myself in the bathroom. He knocked on the door and asked if I was okay. I opened the door, embarrassed, and said, "I'm practicing." He looked confused. Then he said, "Can I practice with you?" That was the second breakthrough. Because practicing alone is one thing. Practicing with someone who loves you, someone who won't laugh at your mistakes. Someone who already knows the story you're trying to tell, that's a superpower. Your brain releases oxytocin. Your stress drops. Your amygdala stops screaming. And suddenly, the words come easier. Not perfect. But easier. We started a new ritual. Every night after the kids fell asleep, we would sit on the floor, no phones, no TV, and take turns telling our day. In English. Bad English. Slow English. English with wrong tenses and missing articles and pronunciation that would make a teacher cry. But it was our English. And it was alive. Here's the psychological principle. Emotional arousal enhances memory encoding. That's a fancy way of saying you remember things better when you feel something. A boring sentence like, "The cat sat on the mat," goes in one ear and out the other. But a sentence like, "I told my husband I was scared, and he held my hand," that sentence sticks. Because it has emotion. Because it has meaning. Because it's yours. That's why traditional language learning fails so many people. It's sterile. It's disconnected from their real lives. You learn how to order coffee before you learn how to say, "I feel lonely." You learn how to ask for directions before you learn how to say, "I'm sorry I hurt you." The curriculum is backwards. It teaches you to be a tourist in your own life. So I threw out the curriculum. I stopped using apps. I stopped watching grammar videos. I stopped comparing myself to people who had grown up speaking English. And I started doing something radical. I translated my own heart. Every time I felt something, anger, joy, fear, relief, I would stop and ask myself, how do I say this in English? Not the perfect way. Just the honest way. Then I would say it out loud. Sometimes to my husband. Sometimes to my reflection. Sometimes to no one at all. I am angry that the car broke. I am grateful that Ed stopped. I am confused about why I'm crying again. I am hopeful, and that scares me because hope hurts when it fails. These weren't beautiful sentences. They weren't YouTube worthy. But they were real. And because they were real, my brain treated them as important. It encoded them. It remembered them. Within a month, I noticed something strange. I stopped translating in my head. The words just came. Not all the time. Not perfectly. But more often than before. Here's the punchline, and this is the part one want you to write down. You don't learn a language by memorizing someone else's sentences. You learn it by speaking your own life, one messy word at a time. That motel room, with its stained carpet and broken heater, became my language school. My husband became my teacher. My tears became my textbook. And the story I told every night, the same story you're hearing right now, became the only lesson that ever mattered. I'm not saying you should throw away your grammar books. Grammar is useful. But grammar without heart is just noise. You can know every rule and still feel mute. Or you can know very few rules and still connect with someone across a kitchen table, in the dark. With nothing but honest words and a willingness to sound foolish. 3 years later, I still make mistakes. I still forget words. I still sometimes freeze when a native speaker talks too fast. But I don't disappear anymore. I don't nod and smile while drowning. I say, can you say that again? I'm still learning. And you know what? Nobody has ever been mean about it. Not once. The fear was always in my head. The shame was always self-made. So here's my challenge to you, right now. Tonight, before you go to sleep, take out your phone or a notebook. Write one sentence about your day. Not a perfect sentence. A true sentence. Then say it out loud. To yourself. To your cat. To your wall. Say it like it matters, because it does. That sentence is your first step out of silence. And tomorrow, you'll write another one. And another. Until one day, you'll realize you're not studying English anymore. You're living it. And your heart, the one you thought was broken beyond repair, will have found its voice. That's what happened to me. That's what the broken car taught me. And that's exactly where our story goes next. Back to the marriage, back to love, and back to a second first date that almost didn't happen. A second first date. Have you ever tried to fall in love with the same person twice? It's weird. It's awkward. It's like trying to put on a jacket that used to fit perfectly but now feels tight in the shoulders because you've both changed. You know the jacket is yours. You know it kept you warm for years. But somehow, it doesn't feel like home anymore. That's where my husband and I were after the motel. The car was fixed. We were back in our small apartment. The kids were in their own beds. The silence was gone, replaced by something almost worse, awkwardness. We had agreed to fix things. We had made our little list of repairs. But knowing what to do and actually doing it are two very different things. The first week back, we tried too hard. He brought me flowers. I hate flowers. They die. He didn't know that because we had never talked about it. I cooked his favorite meal. He had stopped liking it 2 years ago but never told me. We sat across from each other, eating food neither of us wanted, pretending this was romance. It wasn't. It was performance anxiety with cutlery. That's when I realized something crucial. You can't rebuild a marriage using the old blueprints. The old blueprints were written by two different people, younger, dumber, more hopeful versions of us. Those people didn't exist anymore. We had to design something new, from scratch, using materials we hadn't even named yet. So I suggested something crazy. I said, let's pretend we've never met. Let's go on a first date. But not a fancy one. A cheap, awkward, terrible first date. And we have to speak only in English. He looked at me like I had grown a second head. Why English? We have a native language. That's easier. Exactly, I said. Easier is the problem. Easier lets us hide. English is hard. English makes us slow down. English forces us to think about every word. If we can learn to be honest in English, we can learn to be honest in anything. He agreed. Reluctantly. Like a man agreeing to eat a vegetable he knows is good for him but tastes like regret. Our second first date was at a diner. A real American diner, the kind with sticky menus and coffee that's been sitting on a burner since 1992. We sat in a booth. I ordered first, in English. I'll have a grilled cheese and a coffee. The waitress understood me. Small victory. My husband ordered a burger. Then we sat there, staring at each other, because we had run out of script. Here's the thing about first dates, real first dates, not the movies. They're not smooth. They're full of pauses. Full of, so, what do you do? Full of accidental overshares and awkward silences. We had skipped all that the first time around because we met through family friends and got married in a hurry. We had never actually dated. We had gone straight from, nice to meet you, to, let's share a bathroom forever. No wonder we didn't know how to talk. So I asked him the question I should have asked 10 years ago. In English. Slowly. What is your favorite memory from when you were a child? He blinked. Then he smiled, a real smile, not the tight one he used for work. He said, fishing with my grandfather. He never talked much. But he taught me how to tie knots. I still tie my shoes the way he taught me. His English was worse than mine. The sentence had mistakes. But I understood every word. Because I wasn't listening for grammar. I was listening for him. That's the secret nobody tells you about second chances. They don't require perfection. They require presence. We stayed in that diner for 2 hours. 2 hours of bad English and good coffee. 2 hours of questions we had never asked. What scares you? When do you feel most like yourself? What's one thing you've never told anyone? The questions felt too intimate for a diner booth. But maybe intimacy doesn't need candlelight. Maybe it needs a sticky menu and a willingness to sound foolish. Here's the science. Self-disclosure, sharing personal feelings and experiences, is the fastest way to build intimacy. Psychologist Arthur Aaron proved this in the 1990s with his famous 36 questions experiment. Strangers who asked each other increasingly personal questions for 45 minutes felt closer than people who had known each other for years. Why? Because vulnerability is a shortcut to trust. When you share something real, the other person's brain releases oxytocin. Their body relaxes. Their defenses lower. And suddenly, you're not two strangers anymore. My husband and I weren't strangers. But we had become strangers to each other's inner worlds. We knew each other's habits but not each other's hopes. We knew each other's schedules but not each other's fears. The diner questions, even the clumsy, broken English versions, opened doors we had forgotten existed. We made a rule. Every Friday night, we would go on a second first date. No kids. No phones. No native language. Just English and honesty. The dates didn't have to be expensive. A walk around the block. A bench at the park. The parking lot of the grocery store. The location didn't matter. What mattered was the rule: we can only speak in English, and we can only speak the truth. The first few dates were painful. I mean physically painful. My jaw would hurt from clenching. My stomach would twist. Because telling the truth in a second language is like learning to walk again. Every step is wobbly, every sentence could collapse. But slowly, it got easier. Not because my English improved, though it did. Because I stopped caring about being perfect. I stopped editing myself before speaking. I let the mistakes happen. I let the pauses happen. And somehow, the pauses became comfortable. They became spaces where we could actually hear each other. One Friday, we were sitting on a curb outside a 7-Eleven, sharing a Slurpee. He asked me, "What do you miss most from home?" I started crying. Not sad crying. Just, missing crying. I said, "My mother's voice. When she calls, I understand everything. Here, even the birds sound different." He put his arm around me. He didn't say, "It's okay," or "You'll get used to it." He just sat there. And that was enough. Here's the punchline, and this is the part that still makes me tear up. Love doesn't die from one big fight. It dies from 1,000 small silences. And it comes back the same way, one small truth at a time. After 2 months of Friday dates, something had shifted. We weren't fixed. Fixing implies a destination, a moment when you're done. We were in progress. A beautiful, messy, ongoing progress. We still argued. We still got on each other's nerves. But we had a new tool, the ability to say, "I'm struggling," in a language we had learned together. Not our mother tongue. Something newer. Something ours. The kids noticed. My daughter said, "Mommy, you laugh more now." My son, who was barely talking, started singing nonsense songs in a mix of both languages. The apartment still had thin walls and noisy neighbors. But it felt different. It felt like a home instead of a waiting room. We never had a big romantic moment. No fireworks. No dramatic reconciliation scene. Just a series of small Fridays, small questions, small truths. And one day, I realized I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't performing happy wife. I was just being. Being seen. Being known. Being loved in a language that still had holes in it, but the holes were filled with effort instead of silence. That's what a second first date taught me. Not that love conquers all. That's a lie. Love doesn't conquer anything. Love shows up. Love sits on a curb and shares a Slurpee. Love asks, "What scares you?" And waits for an answer, even if the answer takes 3 tries and comes out with the wrong tense. Your English doesn't have to be perfect to be real. Your marriage doesn't have to be perfect to be worth saving. You just have to keep showing up. One Friday at a time. One sentence at a time. And that's exactly where our story goes next, to a Thanksgiving table that almost didn't exist. And a car that became a symbol of something much bigger than transportation. Thanksgiving at our broken table. Thanksgiving in America is weird when you're an immigrant. You don't grow up with it. You don't have childhood memories of turkey and cranberry sauce and football. It feels like a costume you're supposed to wear but doesn't quite fit. The first year we were in the US, we ignored it. The second year, we bought a frozen turkey, burned it, and ate cereal for dinner while watching neighbors through the window, their houses warm. Their tables full, their laughter muffled by walls we couldn't see through. The third year was different. The car was fixed. The marriage was still in progress. And we had something we hadn't had before, a table. Not a nice table. A broken table. Literally. We found it on the curb. Someone had thrown it out, a wooden dining table with one wobbly leg and a crack running down the middle like a scar. My husband dragged it home. He sanded the rough edges. He wedged a folded napkin under the wobbly leg. He said, "It's not perfect. But it's ours." That table became our Thanksgiving table. We invited exactly 3 people, Ed the tow truck driver, Hank the mechanic, and Margaret the retired schoolteacher who had picked us up in the rain. None of them were family. All of them had saved us in ways they probably didn't even realize. I spent 3 days preparing. Not because I'm a good cook. Because I wanted to say thank you in the only language I was starting to feel comfortable in, food. I made dishes from my home country. Spicy. Bright. Completely un-American. My husband made mashed potatoes and gravy, the one thing he knew how to make without setting off the smoke alarm. The kids drew placemats with crayons. The turkey was still slightly burned. But this time, we laughed about it. Here's the thing about broken things, they tell better stories than perfect ones. Ed arrived first. He brought a 6-pack of cheap beer and a bag of ice. He looked around our small apartment, the thin walls, the mismatched chairs, the crack in the table, and he nodded. Not a pity nod. A recognition nod. Like he had seen 1,000 apartments just like this and knew exactly what they cost in sweat and hope. Hank came next. He brought a pie. Store-bought, still in the plastic container. He set it on the table and said, "My wife would have made a real one. But she passed 2 years ago. So you get this." I hugged him. He stiffened, then relaxed. Men like Hank aren't used to being hugged. But he needed it. We all did. Margaret arrived last. She brought flowers, real ones, in a mason jar. She looked at the kids, now clean and excited, and her eyes got wet. She said, "I had a daughter once. She would have been about your age." She didn't say what happened. She didn't have to. Grief doesn't need translation. We sat around that wobbly table, 6 people, 4 chairs, 1 piano bench, and a plastic step stool for my son. The table listed to the left. The crack ran between my plate and my husband's. The napkin under the leg slipped twice, and we had to prop it back up with a spoon. And then we ate. We passed dishes. We spilled gravy. My daughter announced that the spicy chicken was too spicy, but I like it. My son threw a spoonful of mashed potatoes at the wall. It was chaos. Beautiful, loud, alive chaos. Here's the science of gratitude, and I want you to really hear this. Gratitude isn't just a feeling. It's a neurological reset. When you practice gratitude, your brain releases dopamine and serotonin. Your default mode network, the part that ruminates on problems, quiets down. Your heart rate variability improves. Even your immune system gets a boost. Gratitude literally rewires your brain for resilience. It's not toxic positivity. It's survival wiring. But here's the catch, you can't feel grateful for everything. Toxic positivity says, be grateful for your struggles. That's nonsense. Struggles hurt. But you can be grateful for the people who showed up in the middle of the struggle. For the tow truck driver who didn't charge you. For the mechanic who took a vocabulary list instead of cash. For the retired teacher who bought your kids hot chocolate. For the husband who drove 4 hours through the night because you finally asked. That night, after the pie was eaten and the kids were asleep, the 4 adults sat around the broken table. The conversation drifted. Ed talked about his wife, the immigrant from Mexico, the one with the little notebook. He said, she's been gone 5 years now. Cancer. But every time I see someone struggle with English, I hear her voice. Be patient, Ed. They're not stupid. They're brave. Hank talked about his wife too. The ESL teacher. He said, she used to say that every mistake is a bridge. You make a mistake, you're building a connection. Because the person listening has to work a little to understand you. And that work, that effort, that's love. Margaret didn't talk about her daughter. Instead, she looked at me and said, you're going to be okay. Not because life gets easier. Because you got harder. I cried. Of course I cried. I had been crying for months. But these tears were different. These weren't tears of desperation or shame. They were tears of relief. Of recognition. Of finally not being alone. My husband reached under the table and held my hand. The wobbly leg shifted. The table tilted. We both grabbed the edge to stop the plates from sliding. And then we laughed. That deep, ridiculous laugh that comes when everything is falling apart and you've stopped caring about holding it together. Here's the punchline, and this is the image I want you to carry with you. A broken table can still hold a feast. A cracked heart can still love. A messy sentence can still say everything that matters. That Thanksgiving, we didn't have much. We had a repaired car that still made funny noises. We had an apartment with thin walls. We had English that still stumbled and fell. But we also had something we didn't have before, a table. Not a perfect table. A broken one. With a napkin under the leg and a crack down the middle. And that table became the altar where we learned to be grateful, not for the struggle, but for the people who sat with us in it. The car that had broken down on that frozen highway? It was parked outside. Hank had fixed it for free. He said, pay me back by teaching those kids English. And we did. Every night. One word at a time. The car never ran perfectly after that. But it ran. And that was enough. Because sometimes, enough is the most beautiful word in any language. After everyone left, my husband and I stood in the kitchen, washing dishes. The water was hot. The soap was cheap. He handed me a plate. I dried it. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence, the same silence that had once felt like a weapon, now felt like a blanket. He said, thank you for asking for help. I said, thank you for coming. And that was it. That was the whole prayer. One more section left. The final lesson. The thing the broken car taught me about breaking through. Stick with me, because the ending is not what you think. What breaking down taught me. Let me tell you what I learned from a broken car. It's not what you think. It's not, never give up. It's not, everything happens for a reason. Those are bumper sticker words. Nice to look at. Useless when you're stranded on a frozen highway with 2 sleeping kids and a dead phone. Here's what I actually learned. Breaking down is not the opposite of breaking through. It's the same thing, just upside down. Think about it. A breakdown forces you to stop. To look under the hood. To admit that you've been ignoring the weird noise for months. To ask for help from a stranger. To sit in the silence and actually hear yourself think. A breakdown is not a detour from the journey. It is the journey. The most important part of it. Before the car broke, I was driving through my life like a woman possessed. Faster. Harder. Pretending everything was fine. My English? Fine. My marriage? Fine. My mental health? Fine. I had convinced myself that fine was the same as good. It's not. Fine is a white flag. Fine is a lie you tell so you don't have to feel the truth. The truth was, I was lonely. I was scared. I was drowning in a country I didn't understand, in a language that felt like sandpaper. In a marriage that had become 2 strangers politely sharing a bathroom. The truth was ugly. So I hid it. I buried it under to-do lists and TV shows and the exhausting performance of being a strong immigrant. And then the car broke. And I couldn't pretend anymore. Here's the science of breakthrough, and this is the part one want you to remember. Your brain's default mode network, DMN, is the part that runs your autopilot. It's the voice that says, I'm fine, when you're not. It's the narrator that repeats the same old stories. I'm not good at English. My marriage is failing. I'll never fit in. The DMN loves routine. It loves predictability. Even if the routine is misery, your DMN will choose familiar misery over unfamiliar possibility. A breakdown, a real one, like a car dying on a highway, forces your DMN to shut up. Because suddenly, nothing is routine. Nothing is predictable. You're in survival mode. And in survival mode, your brain becomes plastic again. It opens. It listens. It learns. That's why so many people have their biggest breakthroughs after their biggest breakdowns. Not because suffering is good. Suffering is not good. But because suffering cracks you open. And when you're cracked open, light can get in. The broken car cracked me open. Ed cracked me open. Hank cracked me open. Margaret cracked me open. My kids, with their tiny hands and honest questions, cracked me open. And my husband, the man I had been silently blaming for my loneliness, cracked me open by simply showing up. What came out wasn't pretty. It was tears. It was ugly confessions. It was 3 pages of crooked sentences in a soggy notebook. It was the word help whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear myself say it. But here's the miracle, once you crack open, you can't go back to pretending. You can try. You can try to seal yourself up again, to rebuild the walls, to go back to fine. But the cracks are still there. And the light keeps finding them. 3 years later, I still have bad days. Days when English feels like a foreign language again. Days when my husband and I argue about something stupid. Days when I miss my mother so much I can't breathe. But I don't pretend anymore. I don't say, I'm fine, when I'm not. I say, today is hard. Can we sit together? And he says yes. Because he learned the same lesson. The car? We drove it for another 2 years. It never ran perfectly. The check engine light stayed on. The heater worked only on the highest setting. The passenger door sometimes wouldn't open from the inside. But it got us where we needed to go. Groceries. School. The park. The mechanic for yet another small repair. Every time I turned the key and the engine coughed to life, I thought, that's me. Coughing, sputtering, but still going. Here's the final punchline, the one I want you to write down and put on your mirror. You don't need a perfect engine. You just need one that starts. Perfect English? Nice to have, but not necessary. Perfect marriage? Doesn't exist. Perfect life? A fantasy sold to you by people who are also pretending. What you need is the courage to turn the key. To make the call. To write the sentence. To ask for help. To say, I'm scared, in whatever words you have, even if they're broken, even if they're in the wrong tense. Even if your accent makes the cashier lean in closer. Because leaning in closer? That's connection. That's love. That's the whole point. If you're watching this and you feel stuck in your English, stuck in your relationship, stuck in your own head, I want you to do one thing. Just one. Open a notebook. Write one true sentence. In English. Even if it's, I don't know what to write. That sentence is your key. Turn it. The engine might cough. But it will start. That's what a broken car taught me. That's what a fixed heart feels like. Not perfect. Not finished. Just running. Rough, but running. And running is enough. So here's the question I can't stop thinking about. And I'm asking you, right now, before you click away. What's still broken in your life that you've been too scared to look at? Not the car. Not the English. The thing underneath. The thing you've been driving past for months, pretending not to see. The conversation you haven't started. The word you haven't tried to say. The help you haven't asked for. Because here's what the broken car taught me, and I mean this with every cracked, mended, still missing piece of my heart. You don't have to fix everything today. You just have to admit one thing. One true thing. Out loud. In whatever language you have. That's not a grammar lesson. That's a life lesson. And it's the only reason I'm standing here, on this screen, telling you a story that still makes me cry when I tell it. This channel is not about perfect English. It's about real English. The English of late nights and broken cars and second first dates. The English of people who are tired of pretending. If that's you, if you're tired of nodding and smiling while drowning inside, then you're in the right place. Here's what I need you to do right now. Hit subscribe. Not because I asked nicely. Because you want to know what happens next. Because this story isn't over. My English is still growing. My marriage is still a work in progress. And every week, I'm going to sit down and tell you another real story, messy, honest, and slow enough for you to hear every word. Leave a comment. One sentence. In English. True. It can be, I'm scared. It can be, I broke down today too. It can be, that mechanic sounds like my uncle. Just write something real. I read every single one. Share this video with one person. One person who's struggling. One person who thinks they'll never get it right. One person who needs to hear that a broken car can lead to a fixed heart. Because that's the secret. The one nobody tells you. You don't learn English from a textbook. You learn it from a life. And your life, even the messy parts, especially the messy parts, is the only textbook you'll ever need. So go. Write that sentence. Turn the key. The engine might cough. But it will start. And I'll see you in the next video.